All right, welcome to another episode of Closed. I am excited to finally meet in person a gentleman that I've known for a little while, Mark Levine. I said it wrong.
You did say it wrong.
How did I do that? I prepped this because I was concerned about Levine versus Levine.
I would be
because
concerned.
I have a doctor named Levine.
Yeah.
And it always confuses me. Mark Levine. We probably won't cut that. Principal at EBMG LLC, Accredited Property Management LLC, and Apex Management Group. It's one of New York City's most active property managers, overseeing operations across a portfolio that includes condominiums, co-ops of all sizes. Mark's been quoted by the New York Times on how management companies handle applicant data. And today we're going to talk about a really fun topic. I don't know if it's a fun topic, but it's a topic that occupies a lot of my attention, probably your attention, which is co-op board applications, which has been, look, I think a persistent source of frustration for buyers, brokers, attorneys, boards, sellers. Everybody has been bothered by this at some point.
Yeah, nobody's happy with it. At a moment in time, nobody's happy with it.
And I'm not sure that the law that's going to be taking effect will solve all of those issues, but it will create some certainty around some of them because it will impose mandatory deadlines on boards for the first time. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about some potential other fixes or changes to the process. But first off, Mark, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me. I've been watching you guys for a while, so thrilled that you guys called me up to the big leagues, and I'm really glad to be here.
First time, long time?
First time, long time. First time listener, long time listener, first time caller.
Long time listener, first time caller.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. Well, I'm happy to finally meet you in person as well, and to have you here for the episode. So I guess first, before we get into co-op sublet applications, which feels like a nuanced issue, but I feel like most New York City people have experienced this in some form or another. Why don't you just walk us really quickly how you got into the management business, what your background is a little bit?
I fortunately was a Nepo baby. Now it's seen as a negative thing. Before it was just my dad was in real estate. He was actually the CFO of a major developer. I don't know if you ever heard of the Glick organization back in the 80s. So I grew up in the world of him being the CFO over there. He eventually spun that off into a property management company. When that company went out of business, he was handling a building on the Horizon on 37th and First, which was a beautiful building in the city. So that was really the springboard for management. I went to school at Baruch College. I did real estate and metropolitan development as my undergrad degree there. That was only the second year that they had done it. So while I was going at night, because it was a night program, I don't know if it still is, I was also in the property management field starting out. So everything.
You were breaking the program in.
Yeah.
Or helping to break the program in.
Exactly. I'll say even 30 years later, I still kind of dive back into what I learned there. I wouldn't say that it was all helpful because it was development and I do just management now, but there are some core competencies and information that I carry through. So during the day, I would just, anything that I needed to do, I was inputting tenant information. Back then we used like a DOS system with a dumb terminal, licking envelopes, whatever was needed around the office. I was starting to get involved. And then eventually I grew up and we grew out, but I always say nepotism only opens the door. It's up to that person to actually keep the door open. And I think coming from a perspective of trying to grow the business for like at least the last 15 years myself, it's really been an interesting way to see not only just the industry grow, but my company grow. We used to, I think when I came in, we had 25 buildings that were mostly outer borough, a lot of Long Island. And now we're between our companies, we're at about 300 buildings, mostly in the city. So really taking an opportunity to hit the market right now. There's been a really big consolidation of companies with some, buyouts, and we're a private company. And, even though we have 3 companies and we're probably in the process of building another one for, specific clients, we really are trying to focus on how can we make our workflows better? How can we manage our buildings better? It's a big responsibility. It's a lot of money that we're overseeing. It's people, they live in their apartments. That's usually their biggest asset. So we take great care of that, and putting the best pieces in place is really what I'm focused in. And, coming to talk to you today about, even the timing bill, it's just another layer of how can we make sure that before it comes out that we have everything set into place and we're ready to go. And I know we'll talk about that as well.
Yeah, for sure. So I guess for those who maybe they don't live in New York City, or they have no experience with a co-op, they've lived in condos or rental buildings or townhouses or what have you, just walk us through really quickly, like what the co-op board application process looks like today, like before the this law goes into effect, big picture, like what does it look like? What are some of the pain points for buyers and sellers and boards?
So right now we have a whole department in my office that all they do is sales, leasing, and refinance applications that deal with that for the boards. What will come in is a completed application. Every board has an application that they've approved that we put out. Things like credit check authorizations and house rules acknowledgments, everything for their financials, bank statements, W-2s, accountant letters. So all of this information has to be kind of aggregated and then digested by my staff. The biggest pain point is that things don't come in complete.
Yeah.
So when we're reaching out, it could be there's one thing missing or there's 10 things missing. Because the last thing that we want to do as a management company is provide or present to the board an actual application that either doesn't make sense, the numbers don't math out, or there's information that's missing. So most of our time is phone calls and emails to attorneys and to brokers. Hey, this is missing, that's missing. I know that the timing law, which we'll cover, goes into that and the steps that we could take for that. But for us, the pain point is incomplete. Once it's complete, there's no pain point for us.
Why do you find that they're incomplete? Is it people think they can get away with kind of incomplete applications? Is it just
Could be laziness, it could be sloppiness. You also have some brokers that are involved that just have never dealt with a co-op before. Co-ops and condos are super different, even though you have a right of first refusal in a condo. It's a little bit of the same application, but it's different. You know, it's a different level.
there's going to be for the co-op, there's going to be an answer. You're either going to be approved
Right.
or you're going to be rejected. For a condo, sometimes it just sits
Yeah.
interminably. But usually the condo board is going to do a quicker review and they're going to waive their right. Unless
Right.
for some reason they want the unit.
Yeah, or in the bylaws, it says if it hasn't been, let's call it 30 days, if there's been no action, then it's automatically approved, right? So it does take some of the sting out of there. And traditionally, the co-op boards, in my experience, have been a little bit more involved than the co-op boards have been a little bit more involved than the condo boards because it's just different. Condos, you have a lot of board members who just don't live in the building. Renting is a lot easier. There's a lower barrier there. So the people that are coming into a co-op look at it differently. They have a lot more control over who comes into the building, even though it's not a lot of control. It really is. It really should be financial, right? Because when
You're buying shares in a corporation, and is this person going to be a valuable asset to the corporation, or are they going to be a negative to the
Right.
corporation?
And we want to make sure that discrimination does never play. So one of the things that I do whenever we either interview in a building, and then again, once we get into the building, if we get that building, I'll send around a guide to all the board members of a complete welcome to the board guide, whether you're new or you're a returning member, and it has specific items related to specific laws. And one of them is the interview process and the sales and leasing process, and what are the classes for discrimination, whether it's state, city, or federal, so that everybody knows from the jump that we're a company that is making sure that you're not going to be putting yourself in a bad position. And the overall guidance that I give to the boards is if you're not going to feel that this person can financially handle the payments with all their other debt service and everything else that's going on, don't even invite them into the interview because now you're opening yourself up to a discrimination case. Right. You could say one thing wrong in the interview wasn't even the reason that you decided not to get them there, but then you can have a human rights division case or they can sue, the board and the management company. Not worth it. So that's really, for me, the biggest barrier to entry. And I think the boards that say, we have a specific debt to income ratio, we don't allow greater than 80% financing, those are the stop gaps that you kind of put into place so that you don't let anything squeak through that initial review and you can protect yourself and the management company a little better.
From the seller side, when you're representing boards, what do you hear sellers complain about when boards are reviewing applications, denying applications? We've had a few cases that we've litigated on. We represent boards. We also represent owner occupiers. Had some cases where boards reject applications for price reasons, for minimum price reasons. And we've started some litigation around that.
Yeah.
It's kind of a emerging area of law in New York. So, we've started some litigation around those kinds of issues. But very often sellers think that if the application gets rejected and they really want this buyer, their first instinct is that the board's doing something nefarious, even if they're not, right? So
Right.
what do you hear on your end from sellers who are unhappy with the process?
It's a very pressure-filled environment. I think if you've ever sold a house or bought a house, timing has to match up on both the sell and the buy. Sometimes there's contingencies for purchasing before, you have to sell, and it could kill another deal, and it could kill you for where you want to go. So for us, it's timing. But from my perspective, I know the way that my office operates. Once it's complete, we get it out within days. So even coming in, as long as it's, complete and we don't have to go back and forth, the board will have it. And there's really no reason, if you look at this, once we'll get into the timing, there's no reason for a 2-month delay over a period of an application from the time that the board gets it, especially now in Zoom land. I mean, before COVID, everybody had to get together, and then everybody had to meet in person and, go through that. Now, 95% of these interviews are by Zoom. So for them, it's time. For us, it's the actual application process itself. Going back to what you were just saying about some of these challenged, maybe the price is too low, and that's why it was not followed through on, or it wasn't approved. I've been through that over the years also, because I had a building in Forest Hills that for years they set a per share amount, and that was their guide. That was their North Star. And what they started to do was they started to not approve these, sales or proposed sales that were hitting under there. And upon a challenge, what we would do, and I don't know if this plays now with the environment and with the litigiousness or with what you're doing on a legal basis, we would then go out and we would get an independent appraisal,
Third-party appraisal.
and then we would say, oh, okay, yeah, this person was actually like telling the truth. They can't get more for this apartment.
Right.
Or we would go back to them and say, here's our independent appraisal, like come back to the table. And a few of those were solved. A few of them weren't. And then, you kind of deal with that as it is. But I think as long as, the requirements are met, financials are met, everything is complete in the package, you can go through that interview process relatively quickly. But there's a lot of, and I'm not throwing shade at any other company. I know how my company works. I don't really know the inner.
Hey, this is we have a shade corner at the end where we just kind of
we'll just throw it all at the wall
just
right now.
shade.
Yeah. So, I think it really comes down to what are people doing internally to move things forward. Because if you have a small mom and pop company, we have 80 people in my company right now. So we're sizable. I mean, we're still a medium-sized company if you look at some of my larger, competition, but we're not a 5-person company. We're not a 10-person company. And you find that with everything going on in property management now, if you don't have specific departments that specifically handle those, it's just going to drop. And then you're going to miss the boat, and then you're going to leave yourself open either as the board or management company for litigation. And we don't want that. Like we want your first impression coming into the building to be positive on management. We don't want us to be the sticking point, because we want long-term relationships. We want to make it smooth and easy for everybody. And if somebody is denied, it's with kid gloves, and we'll try to move through it and get that seller to understand the why if we can, and then try to come in and, help them out with getting an application faster the next time.
So let's talk about speed. Let's talk about one of the reasons why we asked you to come on today, which is the cooperative application timeline law. I'm going to read from this so I don't get it wrong, which takes effect, I think, this summer for any building with more than 10 residential units. And this is what's required. Boards have to send written acknowledgement by email and registered mail within 15 days, confirming an application is complete or listing exactly what's missing. And then they have 45 days to approve unconditionally, approve with conditions, or deny. And then they can take one 14-day extension without the buyer's consent, and the second if they're requesting clarification. So to start with, one, I guess, big picture, do you think this is a good thing, a bad thing? And then secondly, how prepared? Let's talk about boards generally. I know your boards are going to be super prepared to confront this, but how much of a shockwave is this going to send through the board system? How much litigation is this going to create for us?
I think you'll be happy. I think I'll keep operating as I have been.
Right.
What I said before, I think it holds true. If there's a lot of laws that people or even management companies that don't keep on top of these things, July is going to come around. July 28th, I think the law goes into place. August is going to come around, and they're going to say, oh, I didn't even know about that law, because they're not keeping on top of it. You really need to be prepared for this. We're this is April that we're sitting down. We've got a few months to go.
Yeah.
We're ready. Like, we're set. The only change for how we operate as a company is going to be the first 15-day notice. So I believe we have to send an email out to the parties to request certain information, but we also have to send a registered mail, which is what I was hearing about the law. That's the only thing that changes in our process, because we're continuously in the fold. Like, if we have to send the registered mail, we have to prove it, fine. But we're doing all our communication mostly digitally at this point in our careers. Everybody's got access to it. Regarding the actual timeframes past that, 45 days, in my opinion, is more than enough time for any board to make a decision. I understand the board's volunteers,
Right.
but there's no reason for anything to sit for a month and a half, especially when it's considering a large scale purchase for somebody's life like this. I think it would be a detriment to anybody coming into a building if they run up against that. And I would feel not so secure buying into a building that did that either, because it is an important step for your life, right? You want some movement on that.
But in the past, it did happen, and there was no real consequence so long as the board could represent that they were still considering the application.
Right. What I've done, we set up software that's already loaded in. So we have internal software that I use for a lot of my clients, which we built, and my sales and leasing department. So each building has its own place within our application itself. And there's a sales and leasing page within each building for my team to use. So whenever we get an application in, it's enter in all the party information, the buyer's attorney, the seller's attorney, all the parties. And then as it goes through our system, it starts automatically timing. So we'll see a running timer both on that page and on the master page, if you will, of our application that we're using. So my sales and leasing team will see exactly down to the minute how much time they have left between that 15 days ends. And then once they get it, it goes to the 45-day. So once all of the 15-day notices and, clarifications have been followed, and then we release it to say, okay, now it's in the board's review. The application is complete. So now we start a 45-day timer. So from a perspective of tracking and information and making sure that we're on top of it, we won't let it go, because I have, watching like a hawk, I've got my sales and leasing department overseeing that. And that's been one thing that we're able to use, a combination of software, artificial intelligence, and not only will it send an email to the parties saying, here's what we're missing, and it lays it out as check marks and it does it all automatically. It will also send a pre-formatted letter over to my mailing department, and she'll send that out right away. So we're covering our bases so that we don't put our clients at risk. And that's something that we built proprietary, that we're using. It's called Manage Your Building. So it's like a super easy way. But one thing that I can say, there are a lot of self-managed buildings that are more than 10 units. If you don't have a me or another management company overseeing it, you could be in trouble, because if you're not paying attention, there's a lot of companies or a lot of buildings that are self-managed that just have no clue what's going on. Right. So how do we avoid and how do we prepare? And it might be in the interest of somebody coming in to not really advise the board of that, so that they can claim that they were outside the bounds of the law and then go after them after that. I mean, there's a lot of bad actors. I'm not saying that that's, primed and ready to go, but I could see that happening. I could see it being an issue.
Yeah. Do you think that this will be thorny? Let's forget about your buildings for a second.
Yeah.
You've got that on lock, Mark. Do you think this will be a thorny issue for certain types of boards to navigate? You think this is going to be like a shock to the system of boards kind of operating on their own timetable?
Yeah, I think there's maybe some stubborn boards out there that may not like to be told.
I think you're underselling. As someone who represents boards, I'm happy to say the some stubborn board characterization.
If you're my clients, I'll love you.
You can love them. You can love them, but I think this is a different conversation. But I think in order to have the personality to be on a board and to be a good board member, to like really invest the time into being a board, it does take a certain type of personality.
Yeah.
And I'm a stubborn person. Many board members just tend to operate in that fashion. You have a lot of type A people who are on boards. And there can be a little bit of rubber meets the wall with like imposing restrictions on the application process when it's been kind of outside of what's in the governing documents. It's been kind of the Wild West up until
Right.
now, right?
Yeah, it's a don't tell me what to do.
Right.
I'm running the ship here.
Yeah.
But now that you've got the penalties put into place.
I call them stubborn, not you. Just for the
That's
record.
true. Can I have
You're
that
just laughing.
signed and notarized? But you've got the penalties in place now with HPD if you're outside the, and I think that's the stick. That's the thing to say. And we're dealing with all the other compliance issues. This is just one more compliance issue. So they should, in good faith, follow the direction of the law and also follow the direction of the professionals that they employ to make sure that they're doing everything correctly.
One of the provisions that I didn't mention when I went through it was if the board doesn't request missing information within the first 15 days, the application is deemed complete and that 45-day clock starts running. That's where I can see a lot of the argument taking place, right? Yeah. Over what was that a request for information? I could already see it. I could already see a board member calling a potential buyer on the phone in a more closely held building and saying, hey, we're still missing this.
Right.
And them thinking that's a request for additional information, but that's not necessarily a request within the meaning of the law.
Yeah.
So that's where I think we're going to see a lot of the gray area fights over. How do you anticipate that playing out?
So for us, I think the best thing that we could do is on the application itself, on the cover page, have the law actually show what the timeframes are, show what the responsibilities of management are, and also the board. But the board has to understand that per this law, the only legitimate reach out is through us, through the email or the registered mail that we're sending before 15 days. But then we also have to respond to them saying that your application is complete. And then that 45 days starts. Or if they don't hear from us legally, that already starts the 45 days automatically. So a board member, in my opinion, stepping into this does not in any way affect the law because the law is pretty clear that we are responsible for all of those conversations.
How do you think boards will kind of juggle the fines that are now permissible, which depending on the building can be considered very steep to maybe not steep at all, depending on the size of the building, right? Because I think it's first violation is 1,000, then 1,500, then 2,000 for each one after that. And depending on the size of the building and depending on the scope of the deal, what kind of flip tax is involved, what other financials are involved, there might be some, well, we missed a deadline, but we don't care. Like it's still worth it to kind of reject the application, right?
Right.
Or ask for more information, even though we're past the deadline to ask for more information. Do you think that these fines are going to be a stiff enough penalty for the majority of boards in the city?
I don't think so. I mean, it feels like a little bit of a poke, but it's an inconvenience. Look at the fuel bills that we're dealing with these days. I mean, it's literally running in winter for 6 hours. That's what it comes down to. But isn't it true that if you're at the 40-day mark and they don't hear from you, but you've noted that the application is complete at that 15 days, that no answer is an answer of approved?
I don't know the answer to that.
I thought that may be how we could look into that. I'm not sure. So I don't want to say
we're not giving legal advice in the podcast.
Okay,
we're just chatting.
It's conversational. So that was my understanding of it. If that's the case, then that, 45 days rolls around, it's automatically approved.
Well, I guess what I'm talking about is unconditional denial or approval. So the 45-day clock, and then situations where the board says it's not deemed approved. I'm denying it on the 47th day or the 49th day, which will happen, right? Or there's a reason why we didn't, you delayed something or you asked for more time. There's going to be, as with every law, there's going to be all these little unanticipated carve-outs that boards are going to rely on to ask for more time, and vice versa. The buyers are going to try to take advantage of our sellers. But it sounds like you don't think that the financial penalties are stiff enough to change the behavior all that much, at least in the short term.
I think it's more of a cost of doing business. When you're talking about flip taxes or you're talking about capital contributions at closing, it's a drop in the bucket compared to the potential for, especially for the higher end co-ops where you're dealing with a large flip tax or a large capital contribution. So For them, it might make sense to say, okay, we'll eat the $2,000 and it'll be what it is. But at the end of the day, I think if you give enough time and you do it properly, I mean, they've laid out a 2-month process here and I know, per the notes and per the law, that if you're in a normal summer break, right, July and August, if you take off as a board, which we have a lot of boards that do that, you can basically toll that timing for the period of time that you're not meeting, as long as that's normal and established. So that could be one carve around, but that's also a hard time to do that because there's so many, summer's very active because people want to get their kids into school. So you do and you don't want to do that. You don't want to upset somebody's life if they're counting on that, but you also want to act within accordance of the framework, and that is part of the framework. But I could see that if not done properly, and it's a cascading effect of you didn't start off the right way, you didn't review it on time, you didn't tell them what the actual missing items were, you missed the 15 days, and now you're stuck in this limbo where the sides may not be communicating as well as they should just because it didn't start off communicating. And then you could run into the post 60 days of fines, potential litigation, and a lot of angry people, which we want to try to avoid.
Yeah. How does that, you mentioned kind of the summer recess resolution or summer recess carve out. Given that the law is going to take effect in the middle of the summer, how are you kind of approaching it with your clients in terms of, how to approach applications that are submitted like just before the 28th or just after the 28th?
I probably only have a handful of clients that don't meet in the summer, to be honest. So for me, it's not the thing to focus on. I think we can certainly work with those clients individually and try to create a pathway that they understand. Even though, to be honest, there's a lot of boards that take that July and August off, but they'll still meet and deal with committees. And, the sales committee, and then they'll do the applicant interviews if they want. So nobody's really taking time off. I mean, I deal all day with boards, email and Zoom all day. It's just, I think that's more of an artifact from just meeting in person. I think that we could still move through a lot of these applications without taking that time off. And if there are those that travel and are not in the same time zone as us that don't want to be involved, a lot of those boards will just say, rather than deal with this and have to come back to this, just those people that are in New York or those people who are able to communicate and collaborate on this, just do it and get it through. But we're not going to stop our process. I think we're still going to treat those boards that are off July and August. We're going to treat them just like every other board. Here's the information. We don't want any culpability in this. So we're going to, unless they tell us that they're taking July and August off and it's a closed shop, we're just going to go, business as usual.
So look, I think this law is potentially the appetizer for, from my perspective at least, more interesting legislation that's pending. Who knows whether it's ever passed? This has been legislation that's kind of been bandied about for years.
Long time.
Right, which would require boards to state their reasons for rejecting an applicant. So let's have some fun with hypotheticals for a second.
Sure.
Let's assume that some variation of this law impacts New York City cooperatives in the short term, some point in the near future. What kind of impact, from your perspective, would that have on how boards approach the application process? Probably be a very good law for lawyers, not quite so good for everybody else. But how do you view the prospect of that litigation?
I think
that potential legislation.
I think a lot of boards will be fine as a collective. I think a lot of individual board members who try to steer a certain decision in a certain way based on a certain person may feel a little bit more out of bounds. I kind of mentioned before that one of the things that I really make sure that my boards are on is the discrimination, just, all the protected classes for everything: age, sex, gender, sexuality, job, where you get money from. A lot of those are not our concern. But we have to make sure that everybody obviously can afford to live where they live. So if you're going to be putting it on paper, you better make sure that if this, and I know that you're right, this has been for years, because I seem to remember about 10 years ago when Westchester was first coming into play, that this was like, oh, is this going to come to New York City? It's a requirement in Westchester to do this. And we were just wondering how that would play out. But
do you represent any boards in Westchester? Or
no, I don't. Riverdale is as far as I go up north. for now. But I would say, from a perspective of the board, you got to be so careful. And directors and officers insurance, of course, it only covers you if you're making sound business decisions. If you got to watch your emails, you got to make sure that everything that is talked about in written form, if you're going to litigation at some point, it's just not good. So
there's going to be there would have to be a lot of papering the decision throughout the entire course of the process in a way that probably would require almost too much hand-holding from lawyers because this law would invite so much litigation.
But if I guess, yes, you could prove out that somebody can't afford to live there because you could do a simple calculation if the board has
that's going to be 99.9% of the reasons,
Correct.
right? But if there's one little mistake in like the written rationale, sellers, buyers are going to seize on that to kind of cause pain.
Yeah. And it causes pain now because you'll always get the seller that says, well, you've now turned down 3 of my applicants. Why? And they want an answer. But right now you can't really provide. I'm not at liberty to tell you that. I actually stay out of those discussions because I want to have no known answer other than they can't afford to live there based on their assets and based on their costs.
And that usually is the reason. Right?
Yeah. Plausible deniability is a great thing to have. I don't like to be in the know of everything. I would much rather, there's too much. I mean, all day it's.
You just wear AirPods to your board meetings, Mark.
Yeah, put my head down in the sand. Go on mute.
I wasn't here.
I'll be in the bathroom. Call me back when you want. We really try to steer clear of those conversations, but the only thing that you can do as a board or as a management company is just have such a system in place that it's as much of a fail-safe as possible that it'll, when somebody like you would come to us, representing a buyer or a seller, and it was disproved, I would want, here you go. Or to my insurance company lawyer that's handling my side of things. Here you go. Here's all the data. This is exactly why they were not approved. And we don't want any wiggle room because God forbid, that's a huge lawsuit that could be waiting to happen. And I also don't want to be brought to the Division of Human Rights and have to take classes and be fined. And, it's a very tricky thing to be involved with them. And we want to avoid that at all costs possible.
Yeah. I feel like the headwinds are such that some variation of this law will get passed in the future. There's just too much noise out there.
Yeah.
And I think that the timing law is kind of like the easier lift to like pass first. And it might be the precursor to more overarching reform in this space.
Well, you described it like an appetizer, and I think that was exactly
appetizer.
That is the exact right way to do it. It's like, it's kind of testing our pliability with this and to see how we all react. And then once that's set, I feel like it's going to come behind it and just be like, okay, here's another thing. And it's tough to keep on top of the other things because everything is coming at us from every which angle,
Look, I think from my perspective, again, representing a myriad of stakeholders in these processes, I think the more certainty you can bring to a process that had a lot of open questions beforehand. Open questions invite litigation, right? When they're, I was joking that I want this legislation to pass because it would invite more litigation. It probably would actually invite less because a lot of the litigation is emotionally driven, where someone says, well, my finances are fine, so it had to have been something I said about my nationality or my gender, or they don't, or it's some reason that's disconnected from the financial piece. And if it's in writing and it's explained why it's being done, it actually takes away some of that emotional feeling where like they just rejected me because they don't like me.
Right.
Which is what I think causes a lot of the acrimony surrounding board applications. So I think it actually would ultimately be, maybe not in the short term, but I think it ultimately probably would be a good thing for everybody if some iteration of this went through.
And co-ops are their own beast. Boards have, for years, probably since the 60s, I mean, let's say 65 years, they've enjoyed a lot of, it's been open season, and they don't have to explain themselves. They don't have to give any reason why. They have a lot of autonomy and authority, whether that's per their bylaws or proprietary leases or sales applications. It doesn't matter what it is. They've never really been held accountable because it's a corporation and you're doing it in the best interest. As long as you're doing it for a solid business reason, I'm fine with that. I think it's not going to be so hard for us. I think it's going to be harder for those boards or those board members who have enjoyed that. I have a lot of board members that have been on the board for 20 plus years and they've seen everything. I mean, they were here when internet was just starting, and imagine how different it was to manage a property or manage a board or have meetings back when it was just like a phone connection, and now it's shifted to email and then it's online meetings and now everything is digital.
God bless those people who are on the boards for 20 years.
I couldn't do it. I always say it's really hard to do it for money. I can't imagine doing it for a volunteer position, but for those people that do it for the right reasons, I absolutely value their input.
You could be the host of The Bachelor.
I could. Me and Jesse. I had dinner next to him once on the Upper East Side. It was very exciting. Yeah. Actually, I didn't even notice him. My girlfriend at the time was like, "Oh, that was," I'm like, "Oh, I didn't even notice." I wish I had. So it's been fun to watch how things are changing, but those bad actors that are more self-serving or they get on the board for their own interest, that's where you might find that they're not willing to play within, the rules per se. They may not care as much. So
and look, legislation like this would probably weed a lot of those board members out of the pool.
Yeah.
Whether just because they no longer want to be on the board, or the good actors on the board would not. They take steps to ensure that person or those people aren't there anymore.
Yeah.
It would force some more, natural selection in the board composition process. So, I think as we're talking it out a little bit, I do think that I mean, it certainly would be interesting to watch it play out, but I do think that there's a lot of benefits for boards for legislation like that to pass. We'll see what happens.
And I'm also interested to see if companies start charging more. Because now it's not really more work, but you can justify
it's more liability.
Yeah, you could justify it. I'm not saying I would, but I think if you're getting into the space where now you have to, instead of doing the initial touch on the application and then sorting it out over phone and email with the brokers, now we're talking about actually like tracking mailings and making sure that everybody's updated that way. I could see this becoming more of a revenue generator for a lot of the companies out there too. And that might be a sticking point with a lot of boards as you go through this, because everything doesn't hit the board on these applications. They all hit the applicants. Yeah. So we'll see.
Well, we will see. And if and when this new legislation, the legislation we're talking about passes, we'll have you come back on and talk about it. Mark, it's been a pleasure. I know you have your own podcast.
I do.
If people want to find out more about you, about your companies, listen to you, where should they go? What should they do? So
I've got a few different ways that I've been kind of getting information out there. I have my NYC Real Estate podcast.
You only get to name 2 of them. You can name as many.
Let me get out my notes. I was told to bring them all up. So I've got the NYC Real Estate podcast, which we've got about 80 episodes.
Okay. And what's that called?
What is it called?
Yeah.
NYC Real Estate podcast. It's literally, I got it 10 years ago.
That was fortuitous.
Yeah, it was really good. And then I've got my new TikTok channel that I've been putting out a lot of info. I actually do it's at Mark in Real Estate, which is super easy too. I've been doing a lot of education on there. We host free Zooms on there. I just did one with an auditor. We went through different financials for co-op economists. That was cool. As you know, it's just in the New York Times, which is cool. But if you want to, the big thing that I'm pushing right now, we created a new company called manageyourbuilding.com. If you go to my website, EBMG or manageyourbuilding.com, you'll see it. But that's like a real way. And I think what we said before about self-managed buildings having the hardest time because they don't have somebody leading them in the right direction. This is a software package for those boards to literally just run their buildings as I would as a manager. It's got all the information there and all that. So that is launching soon, but that's like where my head is at, because in this environment with AI and everything that's going on, I don't know if, lawyers are different with AI than like non-lawyers. There's a lot less, red tape from my side of it, but it has been game changing. I would love to have another conversation.
I think it's game changing for if it's not game changing for your industry, then you're doing something wrong.
Right.
If you're viewing it as like a fad or something that is too risky to wade into the playing field, you're not going to be in business in 10 years.
And what I've seen my entire
5 years.
Yeah. Well, what year did you start practicing?
I started practicing in 2008.
Okay. So I started in 98, and effectively management companies were operating like they were living in 1982. And it's always been this kind of catch up where every other industry, this is why I love working with my newer boards, because they're all like in their 30s. They live technology, it's who I attract because that's what I go out with. But it's been really fun to watch the technology kind of grow and catch up with the times where we were operating almost like on an abacus, back in the day, instead of using Excel and all the fancy software back then. But we're in uncharted territories. It's going to be super interesting to see which companies play out, how the boards use it. But we're in this open environment where in the next year or two, there's so much that's going to move. And I'm just happy to be on the forefront of it and just enjoying working with it and through it and giving unique interpretations of information to different clients. So that's all fun for me.
I think for anybody who knows how to leverage it or learns how to leverage it, the ultimate end game for it is you just become a lot better at what you're doing.
100%.
And you can use your time on more high leverage tasks. Even board members who have to deal with so much minutia, most of those board members are better at making the kind of the high level decisions that are going to drive the future success of the building, and your time gets wasted by getting caught in other things. So I think AI will help there infinitely.
Repetitive tasks are done. You can now automate them, and that's the biggest saver. And I never want to get rid of. I know I don't want this to turn into an AI discussion.
Well, then we can have a separate conversation.
Yeah, but it's been great.
Well, definitely check out Mark, his website, his podcast, all of his stuff. We talked to a lot of smaller buildings who are trying to figure out whether they can afford a managing agent, and every building needs it. Even if you're 3 units, you need management. So they should check out your software and see if it's a good fit.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Well, thanks, Mark. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
For more on all things real estate and the law, subscribe to this and our other podcasts. Follow Bergstein, Flynn, Knowlton, and Polina on social media. Subscribe to our newsletter and go to bfklawoffice.com. That's bfklawoffice.com to learn more.